What's up, everyone? Welcome to today's video. Welcome to the Video Game Fight School channel. Thank you very much for tuning in. So I'm not going to beat about the bush too long. We're going to jump right into the Gotham Knights gameplay reveal featuring Nightwing and Red Hood. And I'm going to share my own thoughts regarding all of what we saw. Now, here's the thing. Many people have mixed feelings regarding this particular reveal. And as much as I would love to share detailed, in-depth thoughts, opinions, I don't want to do a review over 13 minutes of gameplay because that's all that is, 13 minutes of gameplay. Nonetheless, the 13 minutes of gameplay are actually very important because they showcase a whole bunch of stuff. They showcase art, they showcase game mechanics, they showcase progression, they showcase a whole lot of things. And so it might even be warranted that that's something that we need to get to at some point. But initially, there are things that we have to kind of quickly point out and a few other things that we probably have to save for later. So I'll give you guys pretty much my synopsis for this video. I'm here to talk about gameplay aspects that are in this reveal good and some of them that still require more work. The reason I say good and more work rather than good versus bad is because this is actually a work in progress. Some might argue that 6 months is not enough time to get things done, and some might argue that it actually can be used to get things done. So that's subjective in its own sense. Not until we get the full game are we going to be in a position to say something is objectively good from our perspectives. It may differ, and something is probably bad. So let's jump right into it. Gotham Knights, wonderful game, epic visuals, everything about the game speaks video game, eccentric, lights up your mood in a sense. The way they've designed the game, they really are going for a different feel. As much as the other Arkham games, which we will compare heavily with, let's not fool ourselves because those games are kind of the pioneers of this genre. We have to come to the point where we say, okay, Gotham Knights is trying to achieve its own thing, so let's give it its own little world. Let's give it its own little flowers for trying to at least create its unique experience. And from that, you're able to see that visuals are striking. They're actually very good. There is no doubt that this game, its visuals, is on par with many video games that you're going to be able to see out there. In terms of detail, in terms of the environment design, I want to personally say, shout out to the environment designers, shout out to the world designers, people who were involved in actually creating this in Warner Brothers Games Montreal. Y'all have done a phenomenal job bringing Gotham to a video game setting in your own iteration, because for the longest time we've had to only see Gotham, or in quote Arkham from the visuals and from the perspective of Rocksteady and even the team who did Origins, which still was guided by some of what Rocksteady did. But this is the unique twist that this team is bringing. So I like what we see. It is shiny. It looks pretty good. You would even put it almost on par with, say, the world in Spider-Man. Now, yes, I get it. That's probably different in its own setting because Spider-Man is a different game that creates its own mood. But nonetheless, it does not reduce nor does it remove from the amount of work that the developers here in terms of environment design, in terms of lighting design, have actually done. Everything speaks for itself. You see the night scenes, you see the lighting, the lightning even that actually follows and carefully clues you into how the world works. You look at the floors, you look at the textures, and you look at the reflections on water and all of those different things. It really speaks volumes to the amount of work and detail that the development has actually put into this particular project. So let's give credit to where credit is due. Shout out to them. Cosmetic designers and artists, that's those who have done character models, those who basically do the art to make the characters look the way they look, that do all kinds of really cool stuff in terms of the way a character model is and is built. Those are also quite, in my opinion, impressive. I really like the way that they've actually brought the characters to life. If you remember the gameplay sequence that we saw with Batgirl, And Robin really does clue us into saying these character models are actually pretty good. You may say, okay, that, Red Hood probably could use some work, but we got to see some of his other costumes and some of his other skins being depicted within the game. So it's not a matter of, okay, we don't necessarily have much to go on. Some of those skins were actually quite sweet. I mean, it's undoubtedly some of the best things that I've seen in terms of cosmetic design in a long time. I know the first few iterations made us always make that joke that Red Hood looked a lot like Deadpool, but once they opened up the menu and started showing the character, man, it was actually pretty cool. I'm in a position where I don't necessarily care much for skins. In terms of that, they're kind of on the bottom priority for my own things I'm looking for in a video game, but I still can say that these are some of the better skins that I've seen for the Bat family members. They seem to be going all out, and we really have to basically go ahead and say great. Now, we put these things in perspective from what we've seen, and I say big ups to the teams within the development that have done this. And I did this on purpose. I gave some of these good sides because I wanted to make sure that we're looking at this not from just a fan perspective, but from people who understand a little bit more about what game development is actually about. You see, there are many, many wheels to this particular machine. And the teams that handle different aspects, that have the expertise, seem to do their jobs and execute it and deliver it in different ways. So those teams that have done environment design, teams that have done character design and character modeling, these are the teams that I'm saying have done a wonderful job. Now, here's where we need to look very carefully at improvement. Number one, the UI. The UI needs a lot of work. Somebody really needs to go in and say this UI is too imposing. The text and the font is huge. One thing about a UI, especially having come from the Elden Ring days, which many people have seen, and even some other games, is to make your UI as informative as possible. No one is saying do Elden Ring 0 UI or minimal UI, but at least make the UI kind of less imposing than it already is. You can give a lot of details and data for very intricate aspects with your game, but you really have to be able to tweak the color schemes and make it in a way where things are, in my opinion, somewhat just in the background and letting the player not feel overwhelmed by having to open a textbook to now read every single stat and try to understand every single aspect. This is just my own personal opinion. I don't think the UI right now, in my opinion, is something that we can call a world class. That's basically something that is an industry standard. If you want to see UI in full, intricacies, go look at Tom Clancy's The Division 2. That is a game where one piece of gear has like 5 different attributes to it, and also has, story and all kinds of different things, including much more details regarding it, like stats that you can't even see sometimes. And they've made sure that those UIs are so well done that you as a player, you actually feel like the UI is not necessarily hitting you in the face. The UI for Gotham Knights in terms of the menu seems like it's slapping us in the face, and they only showed us the side which is under gear. We haven't seen what the case files look like. We haven't seen what the abilities trees look like, or the database, or the emails, or the crafting and the mods and all that other stuff. So I guess there's still more underneath the UI that we're still yet to see. But for now, I'm not necessarily certain that this is something that they want to reveal or release in this state. So UI team, y'all got work to do. It's a big deal. And for those who may have said at some point that Elden Ring did not bring too much UI, or at least sufficient UI, let's also be very measured in how we say that this UI needs to be cleaned up a little bit. Number 2, improvement area is combat. I know some people may probably have been waiting for me to talk about this, because having made over 200 or so Gotham Knights videos, or even videos regarding this game before we even knew the name, I've always spoken about how combat was going to be a necessity. Everyone in this community can agree that the combat of Gotham Knights is going to be the bread and butter of the game. Today, during the gameplay reveal, the combat that we saw was not necessarily the cleanest or most polished aspect of this entire presentation. The truth is, I was actually a little quite disappointed. Now, I'm not necessarily disappointed that the combat is not free flow like Batman, even though I've argued the case that they probably need to get the free flow like Batman, because other games like Spider-Man games seem to have copied it, used it in their own iterations, and it's been successful, even though some people may have argued against it. but I think the case for it shows up today. We'll talk about that later on. But nonetheless, the animations felt clunky. So, combat design team, animation team, I think y'all need to get back to the drawing board, back to the drawing table. Unreal Engine 4 is not necessarily too complicated in tweaking and replacing animations. I've used it to a small extent to experiment for about a year, in-depth learning, and I can say with the team like this, y'all have the capabilities to actually go back and restructure animations. Maybe your animators are working in Maya, maybe Blender. I don't know what, animation software they're using, but taking the animation data that they have maybe from mocap and making it more video gamey. That's basically what it is. In fact, there was one animation sequence that really got me thinking, like, what? That's where Dick Grayson was walking around the belfry. It was so interesting. He walked around like he had a hunch over his neck. It was so unnatural and kind of weird. And I thought to myself, what is this animation? They ought to find a way to make this animation a little bit better. And I think something hit with the IK in terms of the way the character's leg motion basically, animated itself as he came down a ledge. Now, this is something in depth with animation and game mechanics. But man, this really has to be fixed. Very small touches are all that Gotham Knights need. But in the general sense, we call them small touches, but in game development sense, they might be things that will probably cost a lot more time and effort. But here's the foundational point. Y'all killed Batman in this game. You said Batman is dead. If you're going to kill Batman, you better make sure that we forget about him in all of the execution of this game. So everything's got to be pristine so that we don't go thinking, but in Arkham Knight, in all these other games. Because I already saw one of the voice actors saying on Twitter, oh, this is not an Arkham game. I know, but the fans that you're making this game for, like a huge percentage of them played the Arkham games. So they will always, in many cases, judge this game from the experience that they've had in the past. Especially the fact that Warner Brothers Games Montreal have made an Arkham game using those same principles from there as well. Now, I get it. It's not an Arkham game, but it's a game that is kind of, in a sense, taking from some of the already established aspects of an Arkham game being Batman, right? So that's something that definitely needs to be worked on. So right now, I think this 6 months, many people might say that this is not enough time. I believe it's sufficient time. I mean, from what I've seen in game development world and for what I've seen game developers do, I can say that they have enough time to go back and clean up those animations. Another thing too that we have to also kind of point out is the presentation today. You see, the gameplay felt a little clunky, not necessarily only because the animations were clunky. I think one of the people that may have been playing the game is not necessarily well versed with the control scheme. This should have been absolutely cut out of the presentation because this made, in my opinion, what I call a huge impression on the community. This was not the first impression. If you guys notice, the very first gameplay impressions that we got with Batgirl, it seemed very smooth. The person who was controlling the character had a very smooth play. The gameplay was actually quite solid. Today, nonetheless, was kind of different. And that's what gives me a little bit of hope to say, phew, it may have been the person on the other side of the controller. This is not to critique their gameplay ability. I'm just saying that they could have actually allowed that person to play that particular sequence to where it was a presentable and, one free of mistake type, compilation, if you get what I mean. Now, why am I saying this? There is an example, an instance within Jedi Fallen Order. For those of you who have watched Jedi Fallen Order, The Making, there's a video regarding it. It's a 1-hour video. I recommend everybody go watch it. In the 51-minute mark, the developers are actually trying to capture gameplay that they were going to showcase to the world. It was the first time that everybody was going to be seeing gameplay for Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. And I use this game because it's also an Unreal Engine developed game. Within this particular aspect of the documentary, the producer had to play a sequence of the game without any cuts or any mistake. And I remember that the creative director, Stig Asmussen, sat right beside him and continued to cheer him on as they made multiple mistakes in this conquest to capture the perfect gameplay footage for the audience to see. and a lot of things deterred them. They had to do it over and over and over again because things like AI or enemy NPCs will behave differently, or maybe they try to hit an enemy and they miss the attack, and they had to basically start all over again because they wanted one smooth gameplay transition that was actually representative of the game but was being played by somebody within the studio. And they did not stop until they got the final take that they were able to show to everyone. Now, even with that, the game got a lot of flack, even with that gameplay that took them so much, time and effort to get. Imagine a gameplay sequence where Red Hood is whiffing punches, cannot necessarily execute a particular special move like planting the bomb on an enemy NPC. This does not bode well with the community. So I think the developers have more chances. I think the presentation and the marketing now need to go back to the drawing board, take the feedback from the community very seriously, because we're rooting for this game. And, y'all are the ones that actually came out here to tell us that, we have a vision and we think we can execute it. So we're looking and saying, we hope that you're able to execute it, because if not, it's really going to be a hard sell for many people. But these so far are just my thoughts regarding the presentation on a surface level. I think I could have done a 1 hour in-depth, step by step or frame by frame, whatever it is you want to call it, or maybe sequence by sequence breakdown. But I don't think it's necessary for now. I think there's much more that we can see. The game has already, pretty much been in a position where the developers are telling us it's coming out soon. But what we saw today was from a build that probably wasn't, still a work in progress. Well, not probably, but it's definitely a build that is still in progress in terms of its development and in terms of its polish. So we're waiting for all of that. And before I sign off, I have to also say that the transition, or the, in a sense, surprise announcement that PlayStation 4 and Xbox is not getting this game is something that's also really rubbed off on the community in a negative light. I hope the developers are able to actually, maybe someone within the development or even someone within the marketing can actually come out and speak to this and give some really good reasons that will help people to understand this process. I've seen some articles in IGN, but those don't necessarily serve your community, because this game has a lot that's right now giving it an uphill climb in terms of its own battle, in terms of all kinds of other things. And with the reveal and the release of other games at hand, it's probably going to be in a place where this 6 months are going to be some of the most critical 6 months in the careers of everyone who's ever worked on this game. I think they can do it. I'm certain that they have the capability in that studio in Warner Brothers Montreal. I've got 100% confidence that they can go back and make these tweaks and bring out a very solid game. Now, the question is, are they going to be able to dig deep enough to pull it off? I hope they do. Thanks for watching the video. Peace out.